What's up, interpreters? My name's Chris Davis, and I'm the Safety and Training Director with Pink Jeep Tours. I've been with the company since 1999, served as a guide for 4.5 years, and worked my way through guide management, and then Safety and Training Director in 2020. So that's my current role, so overseeing safety and training for the company.
What's up, interpreters? This is Heather Manier, your Corporate Engagement and Partnerships Manager with the National Association for Interpretation.
What is up, interpreters? I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director with NAI. Chris, hello. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We've known each other a long time. I think you were one of the first people I met at my first NAI conference in 2002.
Well, actually, my first conference was actually in 2000, I want to say 2006, Albuquerque.
Okay.
So, yes.
All right. Well,
So
so I'm misremembering that it's all in the 20 something year old range there. So
it all becomes a
Albuquerque.
blur.
It does, it does. But Albuquerque was absolutely a fun one. We had Richard Louv as a keynote there. You have been with Pink Jeep since the 1990s, which makes me look like a rookie starting with NAI in 2002 here. So Pink Jeep Tours. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on to talk about the work that you're doing is it gets into an area of interest for NAI recently, which is to combine the tourism industry with interpretation. And that's we've said that on this podcast before. That Venn diagram feels like there's an awful lot of overlap there. Tourism and interpretation seem to really go hand in hand. But I've been surprised at how often that is not the case, with tour guides and directors not always really knowing interpretation, and then interpreters not really knowing the tourism industry, the way you might expect them to. So, where did the focus that Pink Jeep has on making sure that interpretation was incorporated into the tourism work that you do, where did that focus come from?
So actually, that focus started with the presentation our local Forest Service did. So we operate under permit under the Coconino National Forest in the local district here to conduct our tours, and they were doing a workshop for outfitter guides. And so the purpose of that workshop was to put together a forum where, local tour guides could come in and get educated by local geologist Wayne Rainey. They had a panel of Native Americans speaking. They also had archaeologists, wildlife biologists. So it's kind of like a little mini NIW, if you will, with all these presenters giving a lot of great information. And during that, we ran in and met this lady named Reese Peterson, who had a company called Attending Marvels, and she was offering this certified interpretive guide class for a group in Arizona. And she said, hey, you guys at Pink Jeep should come down. So Pink Jeep sent myself, who was a guide at the time, two other senior guides, and then the guide manager down. And so we all took the certified interpretive guide training. I want to say it was in February of 2003. And after that training, it really opened our eyes to a new way of delivering information, using themes, and also, building relevance for the guests, and, creating a connection with the guest and the resources. And we saw that, it's a really good program. And so in 2004, we actually came to Fort Collins. Mike Peach and myself from Pink Jeep came to Fort Collins and took the Certified Interpreter Trainer class. And we were actually the first class in that building on Cherry Lane. It was pretty empty at the time, if I recall.
Mike Peach is who I met in 2002. He would have been at that first conference in Virginia Beach. So I knew I
Yes,
met Pink Jeep Tours there.
that's probably who it
I
was.
met
Yes.
Mike. I did meet Mike in 2002.
So with that, we, got the certification. And then in 2006, that winter, we started certifying our guides through that process.
I do have to note that I love that you've been with NAI long enough that the
NIW.
terminology the terminology that you used for our conference was NIW, which is what it was called way back when in these dates that we're talking about, the National Interpreters Workshop. That, of course, is what our longtime members call the NAI National Conference.
I was thinking that we should bring NIW back for our 40th anniversary in St. Louis.
I love that idea.
Mhm. So, as obviously now, interpretation has been a part of the tours for a while, Chris. Have you seen the experiences change as you've brought in interpretation?
Certainly, yes. I mean, it helps, our guides facilitate not only that connection with the audience, to know what they're here for, but also to help them connect with the resource. And I think, I think the real shift for us was, using themes and building thematic tours. I mean, a lot of guides, when you first start out, you kind of learn a lot of interesting information and facts. And so, and you try to build stories. And I think in a way that we were building smaller stories around each object instead of, we talk about a specific plant, like, well, here we have the agave, and, this is like the Swiss Army knife of the forest, and you tell about all its uses and things and how people used it and eat the fruit from it. And so interpretation, brought us into the idea of, having a theme and a story that can kind of encompass the whole tour. So, now a tour might be themed on, this rugged landscape helped shape the lives of the people who lived here. And so then you could talk about, what's on the landscape, how it was created, what's, on the landscape as far as plants and animals, and how it relates to the humans who have lived here, as far as we know, 12,000 plus years, that have come and gone from this area. So, it really, I think has helped really facilitate those types of connections for the guest and the resource and why it's important.
Are those themes laid out before the folks who go on the tours? Like, are they choosing the tour maybe because of the theme? Or is the theme, do they get on the tour and whatever route you're taking, that's sort of the theme of that route?
So
I haven't
that
been on the tours. I will
that
soon,
totally
so I'm super excited, but
Yeah, that totally depends on the guide. We have certain experiences that our marketing and sales teams put out there, from your 4x4 experience, going up and down on forest roads that climb rocks and obstacles and things, the adventure tour. And then you've got your heavy information tour, history tour, heritage tour, which goes out to a 12th century cliff dwelling. So, other tours might just be a scenic tour where we go up a place called Schnebly Hill Road for the spectacular views, and the geology would probably be the main focus there. So each tour might have a different focus, but I think the challenge in saying, oh, I'm going to do this tour, this is my theme, is, you kind of got to get a sense for the people on the tour. And our guides don't really meet them until they go out. I mean, a guide might have, a tour leaving at 10 o'clock. That's the rugged 4x4 tour, and they see that at 9:30, and then all of a sudden something changed. Somebody else booked a tour. Now their tour has shifted. So you may not know, 10 minutes before your tour where you're going. So, the guides have to adapt pretty quickly. So they'll probably have a variety of tools and stories and themes developed that they can then, throw out on the tour based on the interest of the guest.
like this is sort of a logistical kind of question, and again, I will find out soon enough. But how do you communicate while, because it's the driver is the tour guide interpreter, right? Like, and so how are they it seems to me like it would be bouncy and maybe loud, and they obviously have to focus a bit on the driving. How do they manage to communicate and do their, other safety jobs? Because I know you're in charge of safety, and what is your title?
Safety and training director.
Safety and training director, right? So can you just talk a little bit about how that actually happens?
So, I mean, the communication piece, we actually used to not have speakers at all. We run open air Jeeps in Sedona. We also have van tours that we go from Sedona to Grand Canyon. We have operations in Las Vegas. It's mostly van tours. But the Jeep tour, it is challenging. You have to talk, and, especially driving through town, you've got traffic. So it was challenging prior to, implementing speakers, but you kind of pace yourself. Like you start the tour in Uptown, where you're going pretty slow, and you can be heard. You set up the expectation that, we're going to drive from here to this destination. So, I'll try and throw in a few tidbits here and there, but it's kind of hard to talk over the traffic and the noise. So you kind of gauge that. Well, now each guide has a little speaker, or a little 4x4 square box with a microphone, and the speaker is in the Jeep. So it's not very loud. So it's not really disturbing the forest so much. It's just amplifying their voice for the people behind them in the vehicle. So that's pretty much the tool we use right now. And we don't use it in one basin, Broken Arrow, which is one of our 4x4 tours. We don't really use it in that basin because sound can carry. So we don't want to take away from that experience of other users in the forest who might be hiking or mountain biking. So that's kind of how we came over that challenge.
We're talking a lot about Pink Jeep tours, and we're talking about the individual routes that you take and the visitors who go there to the 5 sites where Pink Jeep operates. Just for our listeners who may not be entirely familiar, though, can you tell us about Pink Jeep tours and the where you operate and the tours that you offer?
Okay. So, I mean, I'll tell a story first that Pink Jeep Tours really started by accident. It wasn't really meant to be a tour company. A gentleman, Don Pratt, moved to Sedona in the 1950s. He's a retired jazz musician, and his primary focus was selling real estate. And so he bought a pink Jeep, not a pink Jeep, but a Jeep Willie that he could show people the property he had for sale in town. A lot of the roads here were dirt roads back then. And so he was, developing roads that used to be old game trails for migrating animals, but also for the ranchers. Some of the cattle ranchers utilized some of those game trails as well. And so they started constructing roads through parts of the forest. And eventually, Don Pratt would have people on tour and well, actually going out to see real estate. They would pretend to look at real estate just to go out with him in his Jeep because they heard how much fun it was. And occasionally he'd even play the cornet, being a musician. And people told their friends what fun and how scenic they were, that, if you ever go to Sedona, you should pretend to look at real estate to go out with this guy in his Jeep. And he was inspired to paint the Jeeps pink when he and his wife stayed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Everything there was pink, the towels, the bedding, and the courtesy cars at the resort next door happened to be pink Jeeps with the pink and white tops. So he never forgot that. And that's why they kind of named it Pink Jeep Tours when they came back. People, they felt, wouldn't forget it. It's been located in Sedona since around 1960. In 2001, we opened a location in Las Vegas. So we take people off the strip. It's more focused on the natural side of Vegas. So Valley of Fire, Red Rock Nature Conservancy, Death Valley tours. In 2012, we opened our Grand Canyon location, and we operate out of the Grand Canyon Visitor Center in Tucson. And we do Jeep tours that go into the park, and we also have a permit to go in the Kaibab Forest. We also have an operation in Smoky Mountains and Pigeon Forge. So that goes through the national park there and the Smoky Mountains. And then also we have Branson, Missouri. So we've got 5 locations presently. And a variety of tours. Most of our tours are Jeep related, although Vegas has van tours, as does Sedona. So we go from Sedona to Grand Canyon or Antelope Canyon, Horseshoe Bend. And let's see, then our Smoky Mountain Tours has one van tour that goes into Cades Cove there. It's an 18-passenger van.
We've alluded to the fact that Heather said she's going to get to be on one of the tours that Pink Jeep offers. Pink Jeep is sponsoring a tour for a group that will be visiting on January 9. The IATDG, International Association of Tour Directors and Guides, and NAI are doing a partnership event where we'll be in Arizona with tour directors and guides and interpreters traveling together and sort of learning from one another. And, one of the places where this tour will be going is obviously your site there in Sedona. It is something that interpreters and tour guides will be doing together. And then we're going to have, a quick Q&A where we'll talk to some of your interpreters, and then possibly even you'll be there, Chris. So this is all lead up just to sort of ask basically what message do you have for folks in the field of tourism and folks in the field of interpretation about how those two industries should be working together?
I mean, I mean, it's kind of, since we've been participating with the certified guide program and interpretation, for a long while now, it's like a natural fit, really. I see the two as kind of working together. So, in tourism, it's about, access to the place, putting together the logistics of the travel piece. And, we have that travel piece, but not to the extent of, when I think of tourism and the International Association of Tour Guides and Directors, I always think of, the bus tours, Globus and so whatnot that come through. So, you've got the logistics of luggage and all that stuff. And an experience you want to design around that traveling bus. I mean, it's like, the cruise ship on the road. You're going to all these multiple destinations. You stop and, either you take the guests into the site, or you've contracted, another provider to do that for you. We even have bus tours that come up and will utilize Pink Jeep at our various locations for tours as like an add-on. And so it's that holistic experience. And then interpretation, though, I think brings it to the next level. It adds the dimension to it of, making meaning out of what they're seeing, exposing or revealing the relevance of why these sites are important, and helping facilitate those connections as to why that site is important. So I think a lot of times people think that the interpretation piece is optional or extra, and it should really be kind of a part of it, that experience, I believe. So it helps elevate, I think, tourism and gives it purpose, as part of what we're doing. And, some of our guides even look at the small ways of, elevating the experience of, if they can just make people think differently about where they are, what they've seen, and then, help you understand your relationship to those places maybe around where you live that are of importance, culturally or in the natural world. So, I think it's a great opportunity to help people grow.
Yeah, and I mean, the impact on the land that you're actually driving on, right, is something that's part of the story. It must be, I would imagine. So Pink Jeep are stewards of the land, right? And then there's so much cultural stuff and cultural history around where your tours go. Is that something that you use interpretation to talk about?
So, I mean, yeah, we do travel in sensitive areas. I mean, the landscape here has sensitive soils, cryptobiotic soils that, can be easily damaged. We have cultural sites that, from pioneer cabins to prehistoric cultures that lived here. They say probably within a 100-mile radius of Sedona, there's over 2,000 archaeological sites. Just they could be just little, cliff homes or whatnot. And so, we have to always think about that sustainability piece and being light on the land. I mean, we operate under permit with the Forest Service, and there are certain criteria we have to follow too. Like there are certain limitations that if a tour is super sensitive, we're allowed, like for the cliff dwelling, you're only allowed 4 vehicles to be there at one time. Other tours, we used to do a tour to a rock art site where it was only one tour a day, only 30 days out of the year we could go there. So again, the Forest Service kind of looks at what they call the recreation opportunity spectrum and what is the desired visitation for a place. And so they try and manage all that with, we have tour groups coming, we have hikers, we have mountain bikers, they have all these interests of people wanting to use the land. And so they kind of manage it underneath this recreation opportunity spectrum of different road classes, the expectation of what you would encounter on those roads.
And so we've talked a little bit about the IATDG NAI partnership. You've brought up partnerships time and time again. You obviously have a lot of them, whether it's the Forest Service, the Park Service, wherever you are. Can you talk a little bit just about how important those partnerships are in building and keeping those partnerships through the years?
Yes, it is. I mean, to us, it's again, it falls into that sustainability and protection. But this area is got a high use. I mean, the Coconino National Forest and the Red Rock Ranger District, they estimate 2.5 to 3.5 million people will come here a year to this little town of 10,000. And so there's a lot of use. A lot of people do want to come use the land. And early on, it was pretty important, that, we have a permit with the Forest Service, and a permit is not a right for a company like us. It is a privilege. So there's expectations that we operate as an extension of the mission of the agency. So that we, give information about the forest, the land, the people that have lived here, and that overall preservation message for the area. Other local groups we've partnered with include Keep Sedona Beautiful. So we go out and try and litter lift at least once every quarter. We share a road out near Enchantment Resort. So there's a mile of road that we litter lift. Also, we'll go into the forest and litter lift. Other groups and organizations pop up too, like Oak Creek Watershed. They have a volunteer group that goes and cleans Oak Creek Canyon along the creek bed. And, we partnered up with that and provided transportation for litter lifters in Oak Creek Canyon, along with some other groups. This other partnership, the Greater Sedona Recreation Collaborative, it's the City of Sedona, Coconino Forest, Arizona State Parks and Trails, Game and Fish, Yavapai County, and Pink Jeep sits on that group too. So it's to help manage not only recreation, but also there's commercial use out there too. So not only is the Jeeps commercial use, but we have local cattle ranchers that this is one of the largest grazing allotments in the forest system outside of Sedona. So they're grazing in the lowlands through, the fall, winter, and spring months, and then they move them up to the high country in the wintertime. So, they have to manage a lot of different other commercial uses as well. So all these partnerships are all about, what can we do to work together? Like, if the ranchers have cattle ranging in one area, can we avoid that area for a while? And it's always about working together with these different groups in the area to, help maintain the land and make sure that, it's not being overused. So partnerships has kind of been a long-term development with the company. The latest one was, a lot of OHV use that's kind of come to the fore, and a local group called Red Rock OHV Conservation Crew popped up, and that's the OHV rental companies, Jeep Tour operations, and then Tread Lightly got involved at that too. And a lot of funds were raised and a lot of projects got off the ground with rehabilitating some of the land that was abused and, overrun by ATVs. And so educational signage now for the users. And then even on busier weekends, we'll have education tents set up to educate users when they come out to use the forest. And then other things in the hotter months, there's a group that this same community that gets together for preventative search and rescue. So people tend to go out and hike in the summertime. Well, the sun's up at 5:30, they're going out 9, 10, 11 to try and hike, in 100-degree heat. And it puts a strain on the local medical services as well. So by volunteering, these groups get out there and kind of get the message out and help, provide water or information for people who might be venturing out of their comfort zone.
Heather, you looked like you were about to jump in there. So.
Well, only because I feel like we could have a whole hour, or I don't know, a long time on just talking about partnerships, because I don't, it's just so extensive, right? And that's why that look on my face, because I was just impressed by the amount of partnerships that you just mentioned in a matter of minutes, Chris.
Chris, we've talked about Pink Jeep Tours. We've talked a little bit about NAI. We've talked about the IATDG NAI tour that we have coming up. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you got involved in interpretation. What were the origins of your interpretation career? What was some of the early work you did in the field, perhaps even before Pink Jeep?
Pink Jeep was the first, actually.
All right, all
So,
right.
yeah, my background is actually theater. So, I started out in, middle school, high school, taking some acting classes, realized pretty quickly that actors are a dime a dozen, but that if you went into technical theater, and I started apprenticing in local scene shops and prop shops. And so I kind of spent 14 years behind the scenes, and that was kind of my career in theater. And my last job in theater was actually teaching for a college in Illinois. It was a very heavy production schedule. We did 10 shows in 12 months. And not only did I have to teach classes, I was a technical director. So I oversaw every show, the tech aspects. So sound, lighting, the scenery. I oversaw the whole, install, tech rehearsals and kind of releasing the show to run. And I really got burnt out. And growing up in Texas, I traveled through the Southwest a lot, and Sedona was kind of attracted to me. So I just kind of left the college, came here, and I kind of dabbled a little bit. There's a local art center and a amphitheater here. And then it just wasn't paying the bills. And I saw Pink Jeep was hiring, and I kind of made a career shift. So I gave up the dark cavernous theaters that I worked in to go work in the great outdoors. So it's still, to me, it's entertainment. I don't call it so much as entertainment as to what we called in theater history a happening. It's a happening, it's like you show up somewhere, and so that's what we're doing. We're showing up in the forest, and we're educating and telling people about the forest and why it's important, and the art, the cultures that lived here. But it really is very similar to theater in a way in that respect. You're presenting, you're bringing about an emotional response from people, hopefully, as you connect them with what's out there and what's amazing. And I look back, after the conference last year, the keynote speaker, mentioned that book on. I read that this past summer, and then seeing that being integrated, to me, is like, I can't wait to see how that evolves and becomes a new piece of interpretation, which I know it kind of alluded to with this conference, the ABCs. What was it? Awe,
All
belonging,
belonging and
and
contemplation.
contemplation. Yeah. So, I just could see that kind of even replacing the experience economy piece and moving this, into this new realm, in that CIG class.
Yeah. Last year, that was Tom Medema, the retired director of interpretation from the Park Service. And then this year, Dacker Keltner and Yuria Keldnwick, who were talking about that. So you've got a good memory, Chris, for those messages.
Chris, what are you looking for when you hire for Pink Jeep Tours?
We don't, as far as hiring, we'd like to have a background in interpretation or guiding, but it's not necessarily the case. And, people come from all sorts of backgrounds. We've had English teachers, we've had, geologists, the kind of ologists, which is rare. Most of the time we say, how many of you are really an ologist in the room? And most are not. We learn from the ologist, going back to kind of Sam Hamm's book, Environmental Interpretation, and then, his next one, Interpretation Making a Difference. But, we're looking for more of those outgoing personalities. So are you good conversationalists? And, even though they may not be official interpreters, one of the questions we'll even ask in the phone screen is, tell us about something you're really passionate about, and explain it to us, whether it's a hobby or something. So it's kind of like a little audition piece, so to speak. So that's, really what we're looking for, is those people who can really help connect and tell, stories.
Well, Chris, thank you again for taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us about the work you're doing with Pink Jeep. And at the risk of belaboring this point, I want to take another opportunity to thank you for the generosity of Pink Jeep Tours with NAI. You have always supported our professional development and training program. In the entire time that I have known Pink Jeep Tours, Pink Jeep's been involved as a sponsor and a donor, especially the last couple of years. Pink Jeep has been extremely generous with donations to NAI, and that is so appreciated. So your support of NAI, your support of the profession, your support of providing quality experiences to guests at the sites where you operate, we so appreciate it. And I personally thank you, and NAI organizationally thanks you as well. So thank you for all of your generosity and your sponsorships and the donations and everything that Pink Jeep does for interpretation.
Well, we appreciate what you guys do, to support the profession. So, it's again a two-way street. So you guys have really taken, what the training used to be for the parks and developed that into a meaningful, interpretive program for people across all sorts of careers, being at zoos, aquariums, museums, and tourism. So, interpretation, I think, builds, care. It helps promote stewardship for people, and, sustains both places and tourism. So I think it kind of meshes together really well. And, they say if tourism is about taking people somewhere, interpretation is about helping them, that place, stay in a meaningful place in their mind after the trip ends. So
I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, where can people go to find Pink Jeep online?
So, yep, you can go to pinkjeeptours.com. So, and that'll bring up our website with all the various locations. And, just to put it out there too, we're hiring interpretive guides. So anyone in NEI, I know it's a struggle right now with the parks and the forest, and, we have positions available. So if you live in an area of the country that's close, look us up. So we'd love to have you.
Well, if folks have been paying attention to this conversation, they'll know to come prepared with a hobby to talk about too.
That's right.
Leg up.
Exactly.
They might even have a thematic program they can throw out. So
there you go.
And interpreters,
that's
what's up.
What's up?